The screaming started at 0347 hours, Galactic Standard Time. Commander Jake Morrison jolted awake in his quarters aboard the EU's Thunderstrike. Not from any alarm, but from something far worse. The psychic death cries of an entire civilization being snuffed out in real time. The Ravagers had struck again by the time Jake reached the command center. The holographic display told the story in brutal detail. Kepler 186f, home to 4 million colonists, had gone dark. No distress signals, no evacuation broadcasts, just silence. The kind of silence that made your bones ache and your soul cry out for justice, that never seemed to come. "How many does that make now?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 43 confirmed dead worlds, sir," replied his intelligence officer, Lieutenant Marcus Webb. The young man's face had aged a decade in the past month. They all had. The Ravagers hit the agricultural colonies first, then moved to the mining stations. They're being systematic about it. Jake stared at the tactical display, each red dot representing a world that had once bustled with human life. Children playing in schoolyards, families gathered around dinner tables. Dreams and hopes and plans for the future, all reduced to cosmic dust by an enemy that seemed to kill for the pure joy of it. The Ravager. Fleet moved through space like a crimson tide of death. Their bioships weren't just vessels, they were living nightmares. Grown rather than built, their hulls pulsing with alien circulation systems that pumped acidic blood through organic corridors. When they descended on a world, they didn't just destroy buildings. They consumed everything, breaking down matter at the molecular level and incorporating it into their growing fleet. "Sir, we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command," Lieutenant Emma Rodriguez called out from the communications station. Her usually steady voice carried a tremor that made Jake's stomach drop. Emma had been with him through 3 tours of duty, and he'd never heard her sound afraid before. The transmission crackled to life, and Admiral Patricia Hayes' weathered face appeared on the main screen. Jake had served under Hayes during the Proxima Rebellion, and he'd never seen her look so defeated. "All fleet commanders, this is Admiral Hayes. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. The Ravagers have broken through our outer defensive perimeter. They've bypassed our forward observation posts and are heading straight for the core colonies." She paused, and Jake could see her hands shaking slightly. "We estimate they'll reach the Terra Nova system within 48 hours. Collective intake of breath swept through the command center. Terra Nova wasn't just any colony, it was humanity's. Crown Jewel, home to 27 million people, and the largest civilian spaceport outside the Sol system. If Terra Nova fell, the psychological impact would shatter human resistance across the galaxy. But then Admiral Hayes did something unexpected. She smiled. Not a happy smile, but the kind of grim expression a wounded animal makes before it decides to turn and fight instead of run. "However," she continued, "I'm also transmitting the coordinates for Operation Lazarus." For those of you who've been briefed, you know what that means. For those who haven't, well, let's just say we're about to find out if the dead can rise. Transmission ended, leaving Jake's crew staring at him with a mixture of hope and terror. Operation Lazarus was the most classified project in human space, so secret that even Jake only knew fragments of it. But those fragments were enough to send chills down his spine. Before anyone could ask questions, the proximity alarms began shrieking. Lieutenant Rodriguez's fingers flew over her console, her face going pale as she processed the incoming data. "Sir, we're receiving a distress signal from New Houston," she reported, her voice tight with fear. "The Ravagers just entered the system." She clenched so hard he thought his teeth might crack. New Houston wasn't just another colony, it was where he'd grown up, where his sister Maria still lived with her 3 kids. 12 million colonists called it home. Miners who carved precious metals from asteroids, farmers who coaxed crops from hostile soil, and families who had never hurt anyone in their lives. How long until they reached the planet? Jake asked, though he already knew the answer would be devastating. 6 hours, sir? The command center fell silent except for the steady hum of the ship's systems. Everyone knew what that meant. In 6 hours, New Houston would join the growing list of dead worlds. The Ravagers had never been stopped, never been slowed. They were the galaxy's nightmare made real. They were about to murder Jake's childhood home. But here's the thing about nightmares sometimes. If you're brave enough or desperate enough, you can wake up swinging. Jake Morrison had spent the last 3 months studying every scrap of intelligence about the Ravagers, their attack patterns, their bioship configurations, their seemingly invincible adaptive armor, and he'd noticed something that every other commander had missed. Something so obvious it had been hiding in plain sight. The Ravagers had never faced an enemy that refused to die quietly. Every species they'd encountered had followed the same pattern: initial resistance, gradual retreat, final surrender, and extinction. The Altarians had tried to negotiate. Zephyrians had attempted to hide. The Corvan Empire had fought bravely, but conventionally. All had failed because they'd played by the rules of civilized warfare. But Jake Morrison was about to break every rule in the book as he stood there in the command center. Watching the countdown timer tick toward New Houston's doom, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not the false hope of desperate optimism, but the cold, hard hope of a plan that just might work. A plan so audacious, so completely insane, that it might catch the Ravagers off guard. "Lieutenant Rodriguez," he said, his voice carrying a new authority that made his crew straighten in their seats. "Send a message to all human vessels in this sector. Tell them to converge on the New Houston system immediately." "Sir, that's suicide," Lieutenant Webb protested. "The Ravagers will massacre us." Jake turned to face his crew, and for the first time in months, he was smiling. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the expression of a man who just decided to bet everything on a single hand of cards. "Maybe," he said, "but they're expecting us to run. They're expecting us to cry and beg and die quietly like every other species they've encountered. What they're not expecting is for us to do something absolutely, completely, magnificently stupid." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. They're about to learn that humans don't just go gentle into that good night. We rage against the dying of the light. And sometimes when we rage hard enough, we can make the darkness itself afraid. The timer showed 5 hours and 47 minutes until the Ravagers reached New Houston. But Jake Morrison was about to turn those final hours into the beginning of humanity's greatest victory. Want to discover how small actions can create massive results over time? Check out our video on the power of compounding, because just like Jake's plan, sometimes the tiniest changes can transform everything, Captain Mike. Sullivan's hands were slick with sweat as he pushed his fighter deeper into the Ceres asteroid field, the most treacherous navigation hazard in the Outer Rim. Behind him, 3 Ravager scout ships moved like metallic sharks, sensing blood in the water. Their bioholes pulsed with that sickening rhythm that reminded every human of a diseased heartbeat, and the bioluminescent veins running along their surfaces glowed with an alien hunger that made Mike's skin crawl. "Come on, you ugly bastards," he muttered through gritted teeth, yanking his control stick hard to port as a house-sized chunk of rock tumbled past his canopy. Take the bait. The irony wasn't lost on him. 6 months ago, Mike had been a cargo hauler, running supplies between the mining stations and the core worlds. He'd never fired a shot in anger, never even seen a Ravager ship except in the nightmare footage that played on the news feeds. Now here he was, playing the most dangerous game of tag in galactic history, using himself as bait to lure humanity's greatest enemy into a trap that would either make history or get him killed in the most spectacular way possible. The Ravager. Fighters moved through the asteroid field with unnatural grace, their bioships literally feeling their way through the debris like blind serpents tasting the air. Every few seconds, their weapon systems would emit that haunting sound, a harmonic shriek that had become the galaxy's death knell. It was the last thing billions of people had heard before being dissolved by alien bioweapons. But Mike wasn't just any pilot. He'd grown up in these asteroid fields, learning to navigate by feel and instinct when the mining equipment failed. He knew every rock, every gravitational anomaly, every hidden danger that could crush a ship in an instant. And right now, he was counting on that knowledge to keep him alive long enough to spring the trap. "Base, this is Bloodhound," he whispered into his using the code name that had been his idea. "The fish are following the lure. 30 seconds to the kill zone. Copy that, Bloodhound, came the reply from Commander Morrison's voice, crackling with static from the interference. Of the asteroid field, all charges are armed and ready. Just remember, you only get one shot at this. One shot. Mike almost laughed at the understatement. They weren't just talking about the explosives hidden throughout the asteroid field. They were talking about the first real chance humanity had to prove that the Ravagers weren't invincible. For 43 worlds, the aliens had swept through human space like a plague, and every single engagement had ended the same way. Total annihilation of human forces, until now. His fighter's proximity alarm screamed as he threaded the needle. Between two massive asteroids, their surfaces scarred by centuries of collisions, the Ravager scouts followed, their bioships adapting to the tight spaces by literally reshaping themselves, their hulls flowing like liquid metal to squeeze through gaps that should have been impossible. Jesus, that's just wrong, Mike muttered, watching his rear display as one of the alien ships compressed itself into a serpentine form to navigate around a particularly large chunk of debris. What kind of sick mind designs a ship that can do that? Right. But their adaptability was also their weakness. The Ravagers had become so confident in their bioships' ability to handle any situation that they'd stopped thinking tactically. They followed their prey with the single-minded focus of apex predators would never learn to fear an ambush. Mike's heart hammered against his ribs as he approached the coordinates that had been burned into his memory. The kill zone was a relatively clear area in the center of the asteroid field, a natural amphitheater surrounded by floating rocks that had been carefully prepared over the past week. Hidden within those rocks were enough nuclear charges to crack a small moon. "Bloodhound to base," he called out, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "I'm at the coordinates. The package is about to be delivered." "Roger that. All units, stand by for fireworks." The Ravager scouts entered the kill zone like wolves following a wounded deer, their bioships spreading out in a hunting formation that would have been perfectly effective against any conventional enemy. Their weapon systems began charging with that familiar harmonic shriek, preparing to vaporize Mike's fighter and claim another human life. But Mike Sullivan wasn't going to die today. Not if he could help it. "Now," he shouted into his cum, pulling his fighter into a desperate climb. Just as the first charges detonated, the asteroid field erupted in nuclear fire. Hidden charges that had been placed with surgical precision detonated, in sequence, turning the entire sector into a kill zone that would have made hell itself seem like a vacation destination. The explosions cascaded through the debris field like a chain reaction, each blast triggering the next in a carefully orchestrated symphony of destruction. Mike's fighter bucked and rolled as shockwaves battered his ship, the reinforced hull groaning under stresses that would have torn a civilian craft apart. His inertial dampeners screamed in protest, and for a terrifying moment thought he was going to black out from the G-forces, but he held course, watching in grim satisfaction as the Ravager scouts were caught in the nuclear firestorm. Their bioships, so perfectly adapted for conventional combat, had no defense against the raw physics of nuclear fusion. The aliens' adaptive armor might as well have been tissue paper against the fury of splitting atoms. The first Ravager ship simply vanished, vaporized in the initial blast. The second tried to adapt, its biohull attempting to absorb and redirect the energy, but there was simply too much of it. The ship convulsed like a dying animal before breaking apart in a shower of organic debris. The third scout made it almost to the edge of the kill zone before a delayed charge caught it, turning the alien craft into a brief star that burned bright and then died forever. When the explosions finally ended, Mike found himself alone in a field of glowing plasma and twisted metal. The Ravager scouts were gone completely, utterly, magnificently gone. For the first time in galactic history, someone had successfully ambushed the Ravagers and lived to tell about it. "This is Sullivan to command," Mike reported, his voice shaking with adrenaline and something that might have been joy. "The trap worked, we got them all." But even as the words left his mouth, his long-range sensors were painting a picture that made his blood run cold. The main Ravager fleet, which had been approaching New Houston in their usual methodical fashion, had suddenly changed course. Their bioships were accelerating, their formation shifting from a standard invasion pattern to something far more aggressive. Base. We have a problem, Mike transmitted, his earlier elation evaporating like morning dew. The main fleet is changing course. They're not heading for New Houston anymore. Where are they going? Came Morrison's voice, tight with concern. Checked his sensors again, hoping he'd made a mistake. But the readings were clear, and they were terrifying. They're coming here. All of them. And they're coming fast. The predators had become prey for exactly 17 minutes. But now they were angry, and an angry Ravager fleet was something the galaxy had never seen before. The trap had worked perfectly, maybe too perfectly, because sometimes, when you bloody a monster's nose, it doesn't run away. Sometimes, it decides to show you exactly why it's been the apex predator for so long. The real battle was about to begin, and Mike Sullivan was sitting right in the middle of it, surrounded by the cooling plasma of his victory and the approaching fury of humanity's greatest enemy. Want to see how small strategic moves can create massive advantages over time? Check out our video on the power of compounding, because just like Mike's trap, sometimes the smallest actions can trigger the biggest results. The Battle of Titans. Gate began at 0800 hours on March 15th, 2387, and for the first 6 hours, it looked like humanity was about to suffer its most devastating defeat yet. Admiral Rebecca Hayes stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching her tactical display as nearly 200 Ravager bioships emerged from hyperspace like a crimson tide of death. Her hands were steady on the command console, but inside, her heart was racing with the knowledge that everything humanity had worked for was about to be tested in the crucible of interstellar warfare. All ships, this is Admiral Hayes. She broadcast across the fleet communication channel. Today we find out if all our preparation was worth a damn. Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every human who ever looked up at the stars and dared to dream. The Ravager fleet approached in their typical formation, a biomechanical swarm that had terrorized the galaxy for decades. Their ships weren't built. They were grown, each one a living organism bred for one purpose: the complete annihilation of intelligent life. As they drew closer, Admiral Hayes could see the alien vessels pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that spoke of alien intelligence and incomprehensible malice. But something was different this time. The Ravagers weren't approaching with their usual methodical confidence. They were moving faster, more aggressively, their formation tighter and more focused. The successful ambush of their scouts had clearly rattled them, and now they were coming for revenge. "Ma'am, they're not following their standard attack pattern," reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell from the tactical station there. "Coming straight at us, no preliminary reconnaissance, no adaptive positioning. It's like they're angry." "Good," Admiral Hayes replied, her voice carrying a steel edge that made her bridge crew straighten in their seats. "Angry enemies make mistakes, and we're going to make them pay for every single one." The first wave of Ravager ships struck the human defensive line like a hammer blow. Their bioweapons lashed out with streams of acidic plasma that could dissolve a battleship's hull in seconds. But the humans had learned from 43 dead worlds. Their ship's armor wasn't just steel and ceramic anymore. It was a composite material that had been specifically designed to resist bioweapon attacks. "Return fire," Admiral Hayes commanded. "All ships, focus your railguns on the lead vessels. Let's see how their precious bio-armor handles good old-fashioned kinetic energy." The human fleet's railguns spoke with thunder that shook the very fabric of spacetime. Tungsten slugs accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, slammed into the Ravager ships with the force of nuclear explosions. The alien vessel's adaptive armor began to shift and flow, trying to compensate for the kinetic impact. But physics is a harsh mistress. You can't adapt to having your molecular structure rearranged by raw momentum. "They're not adapting fast enough," Admiral Hayes observed. Watching alien ships crumble under focused fire from human railguns, their bio-armor can't handle pure kinetic impact. It's like trying to stop a freight train with a wet paper bag. The first Ravager ship to die took 3 railgun hits to the center mass. Its biohull convulsed like a dying animal, bioluminescent patterns flickering and fading as its alien life support systems failed. When it finally exploded, it didn't just blow apart, it screamed. A psychic death cry that every human in the fleet felt in their bones. But the Ravagers weren't giving up. They never gave up. That was what made them so terrifying. As their front line crumbled, the remaining ships began to adapt their tactics. Some spread out to avoid concentrated fire. Others began to merge together, their bioholes flowing like liquid metal to form larger, more resilient vessels. "They're learning," reported Lieutenant Commander Mitchell. "The survivors are changing their approach. Then we change ours too," Admiral Hayes replied. All ships switched to spread formation. "Let's see how they handle fighting on multiple fronts." The space battle raged for hours, but the real horror began when the Ravagers decided to take the fight inside Titan's Gate station itself. Their boarding parties didn't use shuttles or assault pods. They simply materialized through the station's hull like nightmares made flesh, their biotechnology allowing them to phase through solid matter as if it were mist. Colonel Tom Bradley was in the station's main corridor when the first Ravager boarding party appeared. The aliens stood 8 feet tall, their exoskeletons gleaming with acidic secretions that ate through metal and flesh alike. Their faces, if you could call them faces, were a horrifying blend of insect and reptile, with compound eyes that reflected light like broken mirrors and mandibles that dripped with digestive enzymes. "Contact," Tom shouted into his comm unit. "Ravagers in Corridor 7. All Marines converge on my position." The lead Ravager raised what might have been an arm, and a stream of bioacid shot toward Tom's position. The colonel dove behind a bulkhead just as the alien weapon ate through the wall where he'd been standing. The smell of dissolving metal filled the air, along with something else, something organic and wrong that made his stomach turn. "Light them up," Tom roared, his pulse rifle chattering as his Marines poured fire into the advancing horrors. The Ravagers had expected terror and surrender. Instead, they found humans who had trained for this moment, who had studied every recorded battle and learned from every defeat. The Marines' weapons weren't standard military issue anymore. They were modified pulse rifles that fired rounds specifically. Designed to disrupt bioarmor, each bullet contained a microcharge that would detonate inside organic tissue, causing massive trauma to the alien physiology. It was brutal, effective, and exactly what humanity needed to level the playing field. The first Ravager to take a hit staggered backward, its exoskeleton cracking as the microcharges detonated inside its body. Green ichor sprayed across the corridor walls, and the alien let out a shriek that sounded like tearing metal. But it didn't die, adapted, its bioarmor sealing the wounds and reinforcing itself against future attacks. "They're tougher than we thought," shouted Sergeant Maria Santos, her weapon cycling through different ammunition types as she searched for something that would put the aliens down permanently. "Standard rounds aren't doing enough damage." "Then we get creative," Tom replied, pulling a thermal grenade from his belt. "Remember what they taught us in basic training? When in doubt, apply more heat." The grenade exploded in a shower of white-hot plasma, and this time, the Ravager's bioarmor couldn't adapt fast enough. The lead alien collapsed, its exoskeleton melting like wax in a furnace. The others began to fall back, their bioweapons useless against human determination and improvised countermeasures. For the first time in galactic history, the Ravagers experienced something they had never known: fear. Not the cold calculation of tactical retreat, but genuine, primal terror. These humans weren't behaving like prey. They were fighting back with a ferocity that bordered on madness, using weapons and tactics that the aliens had never encountered. Before their retreating, Lieutenant Amy Clark reported from the tactical station, disbelief in her voice. "The Ravagers are actually retreating." Admiral Hayes watched her tactical display as the alien fleet began to pull back from the human defensive line. Several Ravager ships were limping away, their bioholes damaged beyond their ability to regenerate. Others were simply gone, reduced to expanding clouds of organic debris that glowed with the last flickers of bioluminescent life. But Admiral Hayes knew this was just the beginning. The real war was about to start. The Ravagers had learned that humanity wouldn't go quietly into the night, and now they would adapt their tactics accordingly. The next battle would be even more brutal, even more desperate. "All ships, damage report," she commanded. and get me a casualty count. We need to know how much this victory cost us." The numbers that came back were sobering. Humanity had won its first major victory against the Ravagers, but the price had been steep. 3 ships destroyed, dozens more damaged, and over 1,000 Marines dead or wounded. But they had proven something that the galaxy had thought impossible. The Ravagers could be beaten. As Admiral D's prepared for the next phase of the battle, she couldn't help but think about the power of small actions building into something greater. Each Marine who held their position, each gunner who found their target, each decision that led to victory, they all compounded into something that would change the course of galactic history. Want to discover how small, consistent actions can create massive results over time? Check out our video on the power of compounding, because just like this battle, sometimes the smallest moves can trigger the biggest victories. The screaming started 18 hours before the Battle of Titan's Gate ended. But it wasn't human screaming. For the first time in galactic history, it was the Ravagers who were crying out in pain and confusion as their perfect killing machines met something they had never encountered before. Humans who absolutely refused to die quietly. Admiral Rebecca Hayes stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, her weathered hands gripping the command console as she watched wave after wave of Ravager bioships hurl themselves against the human defensive line. The alien vessels moved like a swarm of metallic wasps, their crimson hulls pulsing with bioluminescent veins that spoke of alien intelligence and incomprehensible malice. But something was different this time. The Ravagers weren't approaching with their usual methodical confidence. They were desperate, angry, and making the kind of mistakes that get entire fleets destroyed. "Ma'am, they're not following any recognizable attack pattern," reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell from the tactical station. "It's like they're throwing everything at us just to see what sticks." "Good," Admiral Hayes replied, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 30 years preparing for this exact moment. "Desperate enemies make stupid decisions, and we're going to make them pay for every single one." The first wave of Ravager ships struck the human defensive line like a tsunami of death. Their bioweapons lashed out with streams of acidic plasma that had dissolved entire cities on 43 worlds. But the humans had learned from every single defeat, every recorded battle, every terrifying moment of footage from the fallen colonies. Their ship's armor wasn't just steel and ceramic anymore. It was a revolutionary composite material that had been specifically engineered to resist bioweapon attacks. "Return fire," Admiral Hayes commanded. "All ships, focus your rail. Guns on the lead vessels. Let's show these monsters what happens when you pick on someone your own size." The human fleet's railguns spoke with a thunder that shook the very fabric of space-time. Tungsten slugs accelerated to 30% of light speed slammed in two. The Ravager ships with the force of tactical nuclear weapons. The alien vessel's adaptive armor began to shift and flow, trying to compensate for the kinetic impact. But you can't adapt to having your molecular structure rearranged by raw physics. "They're not adapting fast enough," Admiral Hayes observed. Watching alien ships crumble under focused fire from human railguns, their bioarmor can't handle pure kinetic impact. It's like trying to stop a freight train with a wet paper towel. But here's where it gets interesting. The Ravagers had spent so long relying on their biotechnology to adapt to energy weapons that they had forgotten how to deal with good old-fashioned momentum. Their ships could absorb laser fire, deflect plasma streams, and even redirect particle beams. But a chunk of tungsten moving at 90,000 kilometers per second? That's not a weapon you adapt to, that's a weapon you die from. The first Ravager ship to be destroyed took 3 railgun hits to the center mass. Its biohull convulsed. Like a dying animal, bioluminescent patterns flickering and fading as its alien life support systems failed catastrophically. When it finally exploded, it didn't just blow apart, it screamed. Psychic death cry that every human in the fleet felt in their bones, like nails on a chalkboard. And that's when something remarkable happened. Instead of being terrified by the alien death scream, the human crews got angry. Really, really angry. These monsters had murdered billions of innocent people, and now they had the audacity to act like victims. "All ships increase firing rate," Admiral Hayes ordered, her voice carrying a cold fury that made her bridge crew straighten in their seats. now on every railgun in the fleet singing the song of human defiance. The space battle raged for hours. But the real horror show began when the Ravagers decided to take the fight inside Titan's Gate station itself. Their boarding parties didn't use shuttles or assault pods. They simply materialized through the station's hull like nightmares made flesh, their biotechnology allowing them to phase through solid matter as if it were morning mist. Colonel, Tom Bradley was inspecting the station's main defensive position when the first Ravager boarding party appeared. The aliens stood 8 feet tall, their exoskeletons gleaming with acidic secretions that ate through metal and flesh alike. Their faces, if you could call them faces, were a horrifying blend of insect and reptile, with compound eyes that reflected light like broken mirrors and mandibles that dripped with digestive enzymes. "Contact!" Tom shouted into his comm unit. "Ravagers in Corridor 7. All Marines converge on my position. And bring the heavy stuff." The lead Ravager raised what might have been an arm, and a stream of bioacid shot toward Tom's position. The colonel dove behind a reinforced bulkhead just as the alien weapon ate through the wall where he'd been standing. The smell of dissolving metal filled the air, along with something else, something organic and wrong, that made his stomach turn and his eyes watered now. You might think that facing an 8-foot-tall alien killing machine would be terrifying, and you'd be right. But Tom Bradley had spent the last 6 months training his Marines for exactly this scenario. They had studied every piece of footage from the Fallen Worlds, analyzed every weapon signature, and developed countermeasures that the Ravagers had never encountered before. "Light them up," Tom roared, his pulse rifle chattering as his Marines poured fire into the advancing horrors. The Ravagers had expected terror and surrender. Instead, they found humans who had trained for this moment, who had studied every recorded battle and learned from every defeat. The Marines' weapons weren't standard military issue anymore. They were modified pulse rifles that fired rounds specifically, designed to disrupt bioarmor. Each bullet contained a microcharge that would detonate inside organic tissue, causing massive trauma to the alien physiology. It was brutal, effective, and exactly what humanity needed to level the playing field. The first Ravager to take a hit staggered backward, its exoskeleton cracking as the microcharges detonated inside its body. Green ichor sprayed across the corridor walls, and the alien let out a shriek that sounded like tearing metal mixed with a dying wail. But it didn't die adapted, its bioarmor sealing the wounds and reinforcing itself against future attacks. "They're tougher than we thought," shouted Sergeant Maria Santos, her weapons cycling through different ammunition types as she searched for something that would put the aliens down permanently. "Standard rounds aren't doing enough damage." "Then we get creative," Tom replied, pulling a thermal grenade from his belt. "Remember what they taught us in basic training: when in doubt, apply more heat. Right. And if that doesn't work, apply even more heat." The grenade exploded in a shower of white-hot plasma that reached temperatures comparable to the surface of the sun. This time, the Ravager's bioarmor couldn't adapt fast enough. The lead alien collapsed, its exoskeleton melting like wax in a furnace. The others began to fall back, their bioweapons useless against human determination and improvised countermeasures. But the most remarkable thing happened in the next few minutes. As the Ravagers retreated, Tom noticed something in their movements that he had never seen before in any of the battle footage from the Fallen Worlds. The aliens were moving defensively, cautiously, almost fearfully, for the first time in galactic history. The Ravagers experienced something they had never known: fear. Not the cold calculation of tactical retreat, but genuine primal terror. These humans weren't behaving like prey. They were fighting back with a ferocity that bordered on madness, using weapons and tactics that the aliens had never encountered before. "They're retreating," Lieutenant Amy Clark reported from the tactical station, disbelief evident in her voice. "The Ravagers are actually retreating." I never thought I'd live to see the day. Admiral Hayes watched her tactical display as the alien fleet began to pull back from the human defensive line. Several Ravager ships were limping away, their bioholes damaged beyond their ability to regenerate. Others were simply gone, reduced to expanding clouds of organic debris that glowed with the last flickers of bioluminescent life. But Admiral Hayes knew this was just the beginning. The real war was about to start. The Ravagers had learned that humanity wouldn't go quietly into the night, and now they would adapt their tactics accordingly. The next battle would be even more brutal, even more desperate. The victory at Titans. Gate had cost humanity dearly, 3 ships destroyed, dozens more damaged, and over 1,000 Marines dead or wounded. But they had proven something that the galaxy had thought impossible. The Ravagers could be beaten. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything. Want to discover how small, consistent actions can create massive results over time? Check out our video on the power of compounding, because just like this battle, sometimes the smallest moves can trigger the biggest victories. The Ravager hive mind had never experienced defeat in 3 centuries of galactic conquest. It was a collective consciousness that spanned thousands of bioships, each one a living extension of its alien intelligence. For 300 years, it had consumed worlds without resistance, absorbing entire civilizations into its ever-growing network of organic technology. Each conquered species made it stronger, smarter, more adaptable. The hive mind had become the galaxy's apex predator, and it knew no fear until now. Captain David Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, watching the tactical display as his ship prowled through the void between stars like a metallic shark hunting wounded prey. The Retribution wasn't just any human vessel, it was a hybrid monster. Retrofitted with captured Ravager technology and scarred from dozens of battles. Its hull bore the marks of alien bioweapons, but more importantly, it carried the fury of a species that had finally decided to fight back. "Captain, we're picking up energy signatures consistent with Ravager bioships," reported Ensign Lisa Parker from the sensor station. "They're running dark, trying to avoid detection." David's jaw tightened. Running dark meant the Ravagers were scared. For 3 centuries, they had moved through space with the confidence of apex predators, their bioships announcing their presence with bioluminescent displays that terrorized entire star systems. But now they were hiding, skulking through the darkness like criminals fleeing justice. "How many?" David asked, his voice carrying the cold authority of someone who had spent the last 6 months hunting humanity's greatest enemy. "3 ships, sir. Heavy-class biovessels. They're trying to reach the Outer Rim territories, the Outer Rim where the Ravagers had established their forward bases, where they processed the biological material harvested from conquered worlds. It was also where they thought they were safe from human retaliation. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Set intercept course," David ordered, "and prep the boarding parties. We're going to take one of these monsters alive." The chase lasted for hours. A deadly game of cat and mouse played out across the cold emptiness of interstellar space. The Ravager ships moved with the fluid grace of living creatures, their biohulls shifting and adapting to avoid detection. But the Retribution had something the aliens didn't expect: human intuition combined with their own stolen technology. "Contact," announced Ensign Parker, her voice tight with anticipation.
"Ravager?"
"Bioship heavy class. It's trying to run." Alien vessel appeared on the main screen, its crimson hull pulsing with bioluminescent veins that spoke of alien intelligence and barely contained panic. It was a beautiful and terrifying sight, a living ship that had been grown rather than built, its organic curves flowing like liquid metal through the vacuum of space. "Not today," David growled, his hands tightening on the command console. "All weapons target their drive systems. Let's see how they like being hunted." The battle was swift and brutal. The Ravager ship, designed for terrorizing helpless civilians, couldn't match human military precision. Its bioarmor adapted and shifted, trying to compensate for the incoming fire. But human weapons had evolved beyond simple energy beams. The galaxy's former victims had learned to fight dirty. "Fire gravity bombs," David ordered. "Crush their hull from the inside out." Gravity bombs detonated in silent fury, warping space-time around the Ravager ship. Its biohull crumpled like paper as artificial gravity wells tore at its molecular structure. The alien vessel tried to adapt, its living armor flowing and reshaping itself. But you can't adapt to having your atoms rearranged by gravitational forces. Quantum torpedoes, full spread, David commanded. Phase shift through their shields. Quantum torpedoes flickered in and out of normal space, bypassing the Ravager's energy shields by existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They materialized inside the alien ship's hull and detonated with devastating effect, tearing through organic corridors and biomechanical systems that had never been designed to handle internal explosions. But the killing blow came from humanity's newest weapon, kinetic harpoons that could pin a ship in place. While boarding parties carved through its interior like surgical instruments, the Ravager vessel writhed like a harpooned whale, its biohull convulsing as human marines cut their way through its living corridors. Boarding Party Alpha, what's your status? Right. David called over the com. We're in, sir, came the reply from Sergeant Maria Santos. This thing is like a nightmare made flesh. The corridors are alive, and they're trying to digest us. Well, digest them right back, David replied. Find the data cores and get out. We need to know where their command structure is hiding. The boarding action took 2 hours of brutal close-quarters combat. The Ravager ship wasn't just a vessel, it was a living organism that fought back with every bioweapon at its disposal. Acidic blood sprayed through the corridors. Organic walls tried to crush the intruders. Alien parasites attacked the Marines' environmental suits, but humanity had learned to fight fear itself. The Marines moved through the alien ship with grim determination, their weapons cycling through different ammunition types as they searched for the ship's nerve center. They had studied every piece of footage from the fallen worlds, analyzed every weapon signature, developed countermeasures that the Ravagers had never encountered before. When the smoke cleared, the Ravager ship was a drifting wreck, its biohull dark and lifeless. But more importantly, its data cores contained something that would change the course of the war, the location of the Hive Mind's central command. Captain, you need to see this, reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell from the intelligence. Station, the data we recovered, ... It's incredible. We found their homeworld. David studied the star charts with growing excitement. The Ravager homeworld was located in a system that had been marked as uninhabitable by galactic surveys. It was a place where reality itself seemed twisted, where the laws of physics bent to accommodate alien biology. It was the heart of the Hive Mind's empire, and it was about to become humanity's primary target. Set course for the Ravager homeworld, David ordered, his voice carrying the weight of 3 centuries of galactic terror finally coming to an end. Time to end this. But as the Retribution turned toward its final destination, long-range sensors detected something that made David's blood run cold. The Hive Mind wasn't just waiting for them. EP was preparing for the ultimate confrontation. Every Ravager ship in the galaxy was converging on their homeworld, creating a defensive fleet that would make the Battle of Titan's Gate look like a minor skirmish. The final battle was approaching, and it would determine whether humanity would claim its place as the galaxy's new apex predator, or whether the Ravagers would finally crush the upstart species that had dared to challenge their dominance. The hunt was about to become the ultimate test of human determination against alien malevolence. And in the depths of space, the Hive Mind was preparing to show these troublesome humans exactly why it had ruled the galaxy for 3 centuries. The war was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Want to discover how small, consistent actions can create massive results over time? Check out our video on the power of compounding, because just like David's relentless hunt, sometimes the smallest moves can trigger the biggest victories. The Ravager homeworld defied every law of physics and biology that humanity had ever discovered. As General Mark Thompson's fleet emerged from hyperspace, the sight that greeted them was something straight out of a cosmic nightmare. The planet itself was alive at surface, writhing with organic architecture that pulsed like a massive heart. Towers of living bones spiraled into the atmosphere, connected by bridges of flowing tissue that carried nutrients and information across continents of flesh. Jesus Christ, whispered Captain Mike Sullivan from his fighter cockpit. It's like looking at the inside of some cosmic monster's stomach. The planet wasn't just the Ravager's homeworld, it was the physical manifestation of their hive mind. A living computer the size of a world that had orchestrated 3 centuries of galactic Genocide. Every structure on the surface crawled with defensive organisms that could adapt to any attack, their biomechanical forms shifting and evolving in real time as they prepared for the greatest battle in galactic history. General Thompson commanded the largest human fleet ever assembled, over 300 ships carrying the combined fury of 100 dead worlds. But they weren't alone. Alongside them flew vessels from every surviving species in the galaxy, the crystalline ships of the Altarians, the high vessels of the Nexari, even the massive dreadnoughts of the supposedly extinct Corvin Empire. They were united by one thing: their absolute hatred of the Ravagers. "This is it," Thompson announced over the fleet-wide communication channel. 3 centuries of terror end today. Every ship, every crew, every Marine in this fleet carries the memory of the fallen. We're not just fighting for ourselves, we're fighting for every voice that was silenced, every dream that was crushed, every world that was turned to ash. From the bridge of his command ship, Jake Morrison stared at the twisted planet below and felt the weight of 43 dead worlds pressing down on his shoulders. New Houston, where he'd grown up. Terra Nova, humanity's crown jewel. Kepler 186f, where his daughter had been attending university when the Ravagers came. He tread on his tactical display represented millions of lives that deserved justice. "This is for New Houston," Jake whispered, his voice carrying across the communication channel to every ship in the fleet. "For every world they burned, for every child who never got to grow up, for every parent who died protecting their family, today we make them pay." The final battle shook the very foundations of space-time itself. The Ravagers threw everything they had at the approaching fleet bioships that could regenerate from any damage, weapons that converted matter directly into energy, defensive systems that adapted faster than human thought itself. The space around the planet became a hellscape of nuclear fire and exotic matter, where the laws of physics seemed to bend and twist under the strain of technologies that had never been meant to coexist. But humanity had learned the Ravager's greatest weakness over months of brutal warfare. They had never faced an enemy that absolutely refused to surrender. Every human ship that fell took 3 Ravager vessels with it, their crews ramming damaged hulls into alien bioships with the fury of the truly desperate. Every Marine that died bought precious time for their comrades to advance deeper into the planet's living defenses. Every sacrifice brought them closer to the hive mind's core. "Alpha Company, report," shouted Colonel Tom Bradley over the tactical network as his dropships descended through the planet's atmosphere. The sky around them was filled with flying nightmares, organic aircraft that looked like mutated pterodactyls crossed with fighter jets, their bioweapons spitting streams of acid that could melt through titanium armor. "We're taking heavy casualties, sir," came the reply from Captain Jennifer Walsh. "But we're holding the landing zone. The enemy defenses are adapting to our weapons faster than we can modify them." "Then we adapt faster," Bradley replied grimly. "Remember your training when conventional weapons fail, get creative, use the environment against them." The ground assault was unlike anything in military history. The human Marines fought through forests of carnivorous trees that tried to digest them whole, across rivers of acid that burned through their environmental suits, and up mountains of living rock that literally fought back against the invaders. The planet itself was their enemy, a world-sized organism that could feel every footstep and respond with increasingly deadly countermeasures. But humans are remarkably good at one thing: refusing to quit when any sane species would surrender. The Marines pressed forward through impossible odds, their weapons cycling through increasingly exotic ammunition types, as they searched for something that could permanently damage the planet's biodefenses. Plasma charges gave way to quantum disruptors. Gravity bombs were replaced by reality-warping weapons that shouldn't have been possible to build. When the final assault began, it was Lieutenant Sarah Foster who led the strike team into the heart of the enemy fortress. Her squad of 12 Marines had volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission, penetrating the deepest levels of the planet's biostructure to reach the hive mind's physical core. "Remember," Sarah told her team as they descended into corridors that pulsed with alien life, "we're not coming back from this one. But if we succeed, no human child will ever have to fear the Ravagers again." They fought through passages of living flesh that tried to digest them, past defenders that defied description, creatures that seemed to be part machine, part animal, and part something else entirely. The deeper they went, the more alien everything became, until they were moving through spaces that hurt to look at directly, where geometry itself seemed wrong. The central chamber was vast beyond human comprehension, its walls stretching away into infinity in directions that didn't exist in normal space. At its center waited the hive mind itself, a creature so large and complex that Sarah's brain refused to process its full scope. It was less an organism than a living concept. Its consciousness spread across millions of interconnected nodes that pulsed with the accumulated knowledge of 3 centuries of conquest. "Any last words?" Sarah asked, her finger hovering over the detonator that would trigger the quantum charges her team had carried to the planet's core. The hive mind's response was a psychic scream that shattered nearby stars and sent shockwaves rippling through the fabric of reality itself. For a moment, Sarah felt the full weight of its alien intelligence pressing down on her mind, the cold, calculating malevolence that had orchestrated the death of countless worlds, the absolute certainty that organic life was nothing more than raw material to be consumed and processed. But it was too late. The quantum charges detonated with the force of a collapsing star, tearing the hive mind apart at the molecular level and sending cascading failure signals through the bionetwork that connected every Ravager ship in the galaxy. The creature that had terrorized the galaxy for 3 centuries died in a burst of exotic radiation that would be visible from neighboring star systems for decades to come. One by one, across the galaxy, the alien vessels went dark. Ravager bioships that had been adapting and evolving suddenly became lifeless hulks, their organic systems shutting down as the controlling intelligence that had guided them for centuries simply ceased to exist. The terror that had plagued the galaxy for 300 years was finally, definitively, absolutely over, as the human fleet regrouped in the ruins of the Ravager homeworld. Admiral Rebecca Hayes broadcast a message that would be remembered for as long as humans traveled among the stars. The nightmare is over. The galaxy is free. Remember this, Dara. Remember that sometimes the hunted become the hunters. The age of Ravager terror had ended. The age of human defiance had begun, and in the silence that followed, the galaxy began to heal. Want to discover how small, consistent actions can create massive results over time? Check out our video on the power of compounding, because just like humanity's victory, sometimes the smallest steps can lead to the greatest triumphs. The end.